Welcome to the 2024 South Dakota Early Wildfire Potential Outlook. This is Darren Claywell, the state fire meteorologist for South Dakota. And I say early wildfire outlook because, well, it's only the second week in February, and there's a lot that's going to happen between now and our summer months. And so let's discuss a little bit about what could happen between now and then. So we're going to look at a quick wildfire climatology. I'll look at some of the forecast conditions for the next several months, and then we'll discuss the overall wildfire potential for South Dakota. So just remember that wildfire risk is really equal to the environmental potential plus the ignition potential. I am not going to address the ignition potential. So there's really an environmental potential. Again, this is an early look at the environmental potential for wildfires across the state. So let's talk a little bit about fires across the state. On each of these graphs kind of represents each section of South Dakota. So picture a map of South Dakota. Top left map is going to be northwest. Bottom right is going to be the southeast part of South Dakota. The lines represent the total number of fires read off of the right side of each of the graphs. The bars represent total area burned and lightning area burned in hectares off the thing to the graph, the side to the left of the graph. Down below is January through December. So let's just focus on the Northwest Climate Division. We can see that peak fire season is really July, August, and September. That's when we get the most fires. That's when we get the most acreage burned. But you can also see there's a sub-peak in February, March, and April. And that really occurs for most areas across central and western South Dakota as a sub-peak of kind of a spring fire season. But if we look at the eastern part of the state, really we're getting into peak fire season. Yes, I said peak fire season is really March and April for the east side of the state. So keep that in mind as we move through, this presentation and then move through the spring months. Of course, peak fire season in central and western South Dakota is the summer months. But again, we're gonna kind of focus on two things here. We're gonna focus on this early shoulder season, fire season that we're coming up on, and then we'll talk a little bit about the summer months after that. So what are some climatic drivers for each of these fire seasons? Well, for this early February, March, April fire season, I'm going to focus on western South Dakota for this presentation. It's really short-term dryness and above average temperatures. If we have a week or two where we don't get a lot of precip or it stays really dry and then we're averaging 5-10 degrees above average, it's going to tilt the scales to get some big spring fires. I know it's been 12 years, but I think back to the year 2012. We had a lot of spring fires. It was a very warm, very dry spring. Going into the summer months, western South Dakota, fire activity kind of peaks third week in June, extends through August. Really, June and July, we need drought conditions. June and July are typically wet months. In average years, grass is pretty much too green to burn in June and July. But if we get drought, some short-term precipitation deficits, and of course above average temperatures, tilts the scales towards bigger fires during those months. August, drought's not that big of a player. Fuels are starting to seasonally cure. And it's really a short-term precipitation issue along with above average temperatures. You get some short-term dryness, some hot conditions, and you can kind of really cure out those fuels that are already starting to seasonally cure. So what have conditions looked like? Well, this is over the past 12 months. This is percent of normal precipitation, with the cool colors being above average precipitation and the warm colors being below average precipitation. Most of South Dakota has been pretty average. The southeastern part of the state, Sioux Falls area, has been below average, maybe on the order of 70% of the precipitation of the past 12 months. But you can see some pretty considerable dryness across eastern Kansas, southeastern Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, and northern Missouri. But yeah, South Dakota's been relatively wet, at least average to slightly above average for central and western South Dakota. Past 90 days, western third of the state's been pretty dry. Central and eastern part of the state's been pretty wet. Northwestern South Dakota, Harding County, it's kind of been the driest place. Short pines up there, the lack of moisture, and you're starting to see some abnormally dry conditions in that area. Northern Black Hills, I don't have the figure on here, but the last I looked, snow water equivalent at our two SNOTEL stations in the Northern Black Hills were reporting on the order of 65% of average. Snow water equivalent, so definitely been drier than average across those areas of the Black Hills. And it's really been warmer than average for the past 90 days. Exceptional warmth, actually record-setting warmth. Look at northeastern South Dakota. I mean, these colors are showing 8 to 10 degrees above average over a 3-month period. That's incredible warmth. And it's really been that warm across the entire state. Minnesota's been dealing with some unbearable warmth, I will call it, for the wintertime. And their warmest December on record. I believe it was even warmest January on record in a lot of those places as well. So very, very warm conditions across the northern Great Plains and upper Midwest through the winter months so far. Drought monitor, upper left graph is going to be the drought monitor from this time last year. We had pretty widespread dry conditions across the region. We've seen a lot of that drought go away, right? We've had kind of a wetter year, wetter summer than average, but we do have some abnormally dry conditions creeping into the northwestern part of South Dakota, and then, of course, those abnormally dry conditions across southeastern South Dakota. But much of the state is drought-free. One caveat with this is we are recognizing that there might be some groundwater issues. Groundwater levels across central and eastern South Dakota are not reflective of the above average precipitation that they've been getting in those areas. In fact, a lot of places are dry. Normally wet places, normal sloughs that are wet over there are actually dry, and that might bring some problems when it comes to our spring prescribed fire season across eastern South Dakota. And this just shows you how we've changed in terms of the drought monitor class over the past 52 weeks. We've seen improvement across wide swaths of South Dakota. Oops. There we go. So what are we looking at in terms of spring through early fall? This says late spring. I should say late winter through early fall. Well, here is the March, April, May, or MAM temperature outlook for this year. So what are the odds of having above or average or below average temperatures in the March, April, May timeframe? Yes, red and orange mean warmer than average. In fact, pretty much every single model, each of these boxes represents a different kind of model. At least that's one way you could think about it. And most of the models that are out there are showing above average temperatures throughout the spring months. And again, going back to the drivers of fires for western South Dakota, above average temperatures during this period is one of those drivers. It's definitely something we're looking at. And of course, we have to look at precipitation deficits as well. These same models are showing average to maybe slightly wetter than average overall across the region. So we might have some of that dryness or that warmth be tempered by maybe some at least average to wetter than average conditions going through the next 3 months. The March, April, May outlook from the Climate Prediction Center is reflective of those that confidence in warmer than average temperatures across our region. But there's less confidence in the precipitation outlook, with the Climate Prediction Center giving us equal chances of above, below, or average precipitation. Here's our seasonal drought outlook. We don't expect any more drought to develop across South Dakota, but across kind of the northern tier counties and states across the upper Midwest and northern Great Plains, looking at some drought development in those areas adjacent to Canada. Moving forward a little bit, now this is June, July, and August, JJA, June, July, and August. This is our temperature forecast for those 3 months. And once again, I don't think there's going to be any way around it. We are looking at another warmer than average summer across really all of North America, inclusive of Alaska and the continental United States. So warmer than average conditions are expected. Looking at precipitation, now we're starting to see some hints of maybe drier than average conditions across the Rocky Mountain West and the northern Rockies and kind of the central Great Plains. And that might have some impacts on us here in South Dakota. If we see warmer and drier than average conditions going through the summer, that screams higher fire potential. Here's the official forecast from the Climate Prediction Center. This should say June, July, and August, not July, August, and September. This is for June, July, and August, JJA. I don't know why there's a hole across the Dakotas there in terms of the temperature, but I would suggest that we're going to see warmer than average temperatures across the entire continental United States. And the hints are now showing below average precipitation during the same period. Reminder, June and July are a couple of our wettest months. If we don't get the precipitation or even average precipitation, we are tilting the scales towards more fire potential as we get into the mid to late summer months. Here is the National Interagency Fire Centers and Predictive Services National Significant Wildland Fire Potential Outlook. This is for March, this is for April, and this is for May. They're highlighting Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and the UP of Michigan. This has been standing out for a while. Minnesota is the warmth they've had this winter is pretty unbelievable. They have a snow drought. There's really no snow across much of the state, which is very, very unusual for early February. And if they continue with the warmth and they continue with the dry conditions, they could have a very impactful spring fire season if, of course, they get the ignitions. I'll close out with just a few interesting trends. These are the probabilities of seeing La Nina, neutral, or El Nino conditions in the coming months. So down below we have the season. So this is January, February, March, April, March, April, May, June, July, etc. So they're kind of like 3-month running averages. Right now we are firmly locked into an El Nino, and we're expecting to stay into that El Nino through mid to late spring. After that, El Nino conditions should start to decline, but we are anticipating La Nina conditions to return to the Pacific Ocean coming, late summer into early fall. So maybe a quick transition from the El Nino conditions that we're in, which is a warmer than average sea surface temperatures over the eastern equatorial ocean, to cooler than average sea surface temperatures across the eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean. So just kind of an interesting switch and a pretty fast switch. And everything in blue here represents La Nina timeframes. Everything in red shows El Nino timeframes. And again, DJF is just December, January, February. And then we have January, February, March, etc., all the way through the year. And then the years from 2011 to present are here. So yeah, we've had this quick switch out in 2022, 2023 of going from a strong La Nina to the current very strong El Nino. And then we're expecting another quick shift into La Nina conditions over the next maybe 7 to 12 months. I'm looking at just pattern recognition here. 2016, we shifted from a very strong El Nino into a moderate La Nina. And, 2016 was a relatively dry year for the state of South Dakota and actually the Rocky Mountains at large. And so, I don't want to draw conclusions from this, but like I say, they're just interesting trends. Big takeaways for 2024, I think we're going to see the continuation of warmth. It's going to be another warm year. It's going to be a warm year across the Rockies, the northern Great Plains. There are some strong hints that we could see, warmer and drier than average conditions, which could definitely lead to more fire potential across the region. I think in the near term, we have to think about, our spring shoulder fire season and what we might see over the next couple of months. Once we start to warm up a little bit more in March, if we don't get the precipitation and those warm temperatures hit, we could see an active spring fire season as well. As always, feel free to reach out, contact me if you need any help or have any questions. Feel free. There's my contact info. I'm available most of the time. I run a one-person operation, so just keep that in mind too. Thank you all for listening, and hope to see you out in the field.